I'm David Bank, and from Impact Alpha, this is an Agents of Impact podcast.
Gender is on the agenda. Now the question for us is, how do we demonstrate and make the case for others to understand that just like nature is material, gender is material for all investors to consider.
That's Sana Kapadia, Chief Catalyst at Heading for Change. Folks know Heading for Change and its portfolio of climate plus gender funds as the legacy project of the late Suzanne Beagle, and we've been working with Sana and the team on our own climate and gender coverage. Sana is headed to Baku, Azerbaijan for the Global Climate Summit known as COP29. This year's gathering has been called the Finance COP, and negotiators are hammering out new financial targets for investment and assistance in the climate transition in developing countries and the Global South more broadly. Sana gave us a preview of what to expect. Let's jump right in. Welcome to the podcast, Sana.
Hey, David. Great to see you.
We're so excited to have this conversation. Climate is on everybody's minds, and in particular because the annual climate summit, the COP, this one, COP29, is taking place in Baku, Azerbaijan. And it's just a short hop from where you are in Dubai, and you're headed off there next week. So what are you looking forward to, and what are you up to there?
Yeah, David, maybe they knew I was trying to keep my environmental footprint down, and so it's closer to home one more time. I think this is a really important COP. I know that it's on a lot of people's minds. It's being framed as the Finance COP because a core part of the discussion is coming up with the next new collective quantified goal, where there was an original sort of floor that was set as part of the Paris Agreement. And there's a lot of discussion and conversation about what it's going to take to level that up. So that's top of mind for me.
The famous $100 billion that's been pledged ever since 2015 that has never been actually delivered. And now we have a new acronym, the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, there's good reasons for that not having been met. And I'm sure we can get into some of that. But I think this moment in time is also really important for any of us working not only in social impact, but in the broader field of sustainability and finance, because if you think about this COP as part of a troika, as they frame it, so you have the UAE hosting the COP last year, which led to the UAE consensus, and the words phase out of fossil fuels was within the final documents. And now we have the Baku COP focused on climate finance, and in particular, the new collective quantified goal, as well as Article 6, which is things around carbon credits and much more. And there's lots of other climate-related and finance-related topics on discussion. And then there's a pathway to Brazil next year. And in the course of next year, countries will also have to share their nationally determined contributions and action plans, which basically spells out how they're going to meet some of the commitments that we're making. So in this time of so much political, social upheaval everywhere, focusing on getting climate finance moving where it's needed to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, but also to really provide the liquidity to help us towards this transition is essential. So I'm looking forward to being immersed in these conversations where we get to not just dig into the urgency, but really start to spell out action pathways for how we can do this collectively in a way that works for all.
And it's all, as you say, it's about mobilizing capital at scale to tackle these challenges. You have come at it in particular in your new role or in your current role at Heading for Change in terms of the role of women and mobilizing capital with a gender lens as well. But that's obviously just part of the broader mobilization of capital. Are you feeling the winds in your sails, or are you feeling the headwinds?
It depends what time of day you asked me that question. Earlier this morning, I saw a photo. They publish this photo every year of what the heads of state stand together and take a photo at the opening ceremony of the COP. And I think I was reading a post today where someone said that there were 8 women heads of state and 69 men. And so clearly we need to do a better job on representation at the very least. But that's not what gender responsive climate finance is about. What we're talking about is not just the quantum, but the quality. How are the differentiated needs of women and underrepresented Indigenous communities even being factored into the design of some of these solutions and products? How are, in our case, gender smart climate fund managers who are at the forefront of solutions and backing the next generation of innovators getting not just the capital, but the broader support that they need? If you think about the women entrepreneurs on the ground across multiple themes, whether it's agriculture, renewable energy, etc., how are they getting liquidity plus technical assistance, the whole gambit of support that's needed to really level up and scale going forward? And that's part of the richness, I think, of what can be done in terms of the quality of how capital moves. But if we have to start somewhere, yes, but I would love for us to move beyond, are there women at the COP? That's a very important part of it. But how are these women? And there's beautiful examples that we can get into of women who are leading the charge and trying to change the narrative and also come up with the right size solutions.
Well, let's do dig in because these needs, as you said, and these questions about quality as well as quantity of capital have been known for some years. And I think, as you said, a lot of these things have reached a kind of maturity and at least readiness to scale. And so that was sort of the question is like, one thing you could think of, for example, the adaptation discussion, which has sort of languished for years, but has now become much more prominent. And frankly, one of the ironies of the whole situation is that adaptation investments become much better investments the sort of worse things get, and the risks and the costs become better known, and so now adaptation is sort of front and center as folks are really feeling the brunt of climate, and as we know, women in particular feel the brunt of climate change. So give us some of those rays of hope of folks that are scaling up some innovative solutions.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the data, I definitely refer to and I think they only just came out with this in time for COP, but the Climate Policy Initiative does a mapping or a landscaping of climate finance flows. And I think their most recent estimate was that about $1.5 trillion have moved for climate finance over the last year. And this is comprised of both public and private market sources. And it sort of disaggregates it by different themes. I think increasingly we are seeing more private sector actors. And I think to your point, David, there's like a commercial viability aspect that is filtering into some of these investment decisions. But you're also hearing the discourse from the more climate justice, feminist communities where there's an onus here to be shared between the types of capital. There are some instances, so for example, within the COP architecture and within the climate finance discussions, there's also the loss and damage fund, which is really to make sure that vulnerable countries have access to the types of funding that they need, particularly in terms of crisis. And there's a lot of discussion in terms of how to make sure that that's actually bolted into the NCQG so that we can have concessional, more grant based capital for developing nations, but also have other types of capital flow to, where it's needed. So I think it's really having this more full spectrum approach, and recognizing that all countries will have various mitigation adaptation needs depending also on where they are in the energy life cycle.
There is a moment now, I think, for some of the practices and approaches that impact investors and others, development folks have honed over the years in terms of blended finance, and you can see those in the blended finance numbers of ways in which institutional capital can be brought to bear with some kinds of risk mitigation and those sorts of things. And I hope the folks thinking about how to mobilize are working on all those levers, as you said. Now, heading for change, occupies a special place here, maybe small in the scheme of things in COP, but at least sort of holding a space open. You yourself, came from 2X, which is, as folks might know, the initiative of some of the development financial institutions to really radically increase the amount of money going into a gender lens, and then Heading for Change brings it back to climate specifically. So at the nexus of climate plus gender, Heading for Change, I think, really is in a sweet spot. What are you actually doing, at the COP to sort of wave that flag?
Yeah, thanks, David. So the COP, I'd say my areas of focus next week are really going to be advancing this dialogue on why and how gender responsive climate finance matters. So yes, it's a nascent field of bringing this intersection together, but there's an increasing set of examples across different climate themes, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's renewables, whether it's transportation, built environment, sustainable cities, the whole gambit, where gender and climate are increasingly being seen as a way to enhance climate, gender, and social and environmental outcomes within our own portfolio. We're focused on private market investments, and we're at about 10 right now, 7 of which are public, and the rest we'll be sharing more soon. But even as we're building out this demonstration portfolio, we're trying to balance across mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, as well as some of those subclimate themes. And the pipeline is much bigger. And so, as that opportunity set grows, not one of our key commitments is also to share with the field, like, hey guys, look at these amazing opportunities that are out there. And more so, here's how these fund managers, but also the innovators that they're backing, are coming up with solutions that are proximate, that are local, that are solving for the needs of the communities, but they're also doing this at scale, largely in a commercially viable way. Sometimes there might be the need for some more, technical assistance, etc. But to your point about blended finance facilities, this is another trend that we're seeing, particularly in the emerging markets, is you're seeing a sort of full stack where there's the technical assistance built in. And so that can either take form of venture building, ecosystem support, so a vibrant pipeline is being built in addition to sort of supporting these ventures. So there's lots of exciting things that we're seeing in our own portfolio and even on the grant side of things. So yeah, next week for me is very much focused on why does a gender lens matter for climate finance more than the why. I think a lot of people are convinced on the why, but it's more the how. And I think by sharing the examples and case studies, as well as listening to the voices of communities that have been sidelined, whether it's the indigenous communities, whether it's the entrepreneurs, etc., and bringing them into the fold, because ultimately it has to be a more participatory approach that helps us, make better decisions. That's why diversity matters, right?
You mentioned that the high-level climate representative from last year's COP, there in your hometown of Dubai, was quite active on gender issues.
Yeah, it's a real honor to have joined some of the sessions that Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, who is the high level climate champion for the UAE, hosted. There was a great conference with a number of partners, including WeDo and others, on gender and environment data. There was a lot that Razan championed around nature and biodiversity. I also saw she was recently at COP16 and really bringing that to the fold in the agenda.
That's the biodiversity COP, just for folks to keeping track of their
Yeah,
COPs. Yeah.
exactly. So there's going to be this session, which is beautiful in that, and it speaks to that troika aspect, because we have all the amazing work that Razan and Mubarak and her team have been doing on nature, biodiversity, gender, indigenous communities. Over the last year, we have this moment which is focused on climate finance, and then we'll also bring in the folks from Brazil. So there's a nice thread. I should also add that in addition to like the new collective quantified goal, there's another branch, which is the Standing Committee of Finance, and they really focused on this topic of gender responsive climate finance when they convened in Arusha in September, I think. So gender is on the agenda. Now the question for us is, how do we demonstrate and make the case for others to understand that just like nature is material, gender is material for all investors to consider. And we're seeing that shift where nature and climate are coming closer together. So, one of the levers that we see here is making, again, that case for how do you integrate gender as a lens across your approach, because it is a material and significant, not just risk, but opportunity for investors.
Indeed, indeed. You mentioned the Troika and also the UAE effort and including fairly large commitments of capital. And now the COP is in Azerbaijan, and Baku is known actually for sort of gushers, Texas-sized gushers back in the day, as another oil producing country. And one of the questions that always comes up is, what is the role of these oil producing countries in forging this climate transition, and in fact, even oil money, just to put it bluntly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely a sticky point. I think just there's, news that has come out earlier this week of side discussions on new fossil fuel deals, etc. I think, David, it speaks to me a little bit about, frankly, the state of cognitive dissonance that we continue to embody as a human society, where we can see the train coming at us, it's on fire, and somehow we're looking away or digging digging a bigger hole in some ways. There's the science has never been clearer. All the planetary boundaries have been breached or close to being breached. Unless we're grounding our climate finance and climate action in science, that's it's not going to be as impactful and effective. And I was just reading today, for example, fossil fuel subsidies were in the tune of 7 trillion, and I referred to that climate finance flows of 1.5 trillion. That just speaks to how that disconnect is playing out. And I think that there's enough data out there on the lower and more energy efficient cost of renewables, and a pathway for us. We're still 1.5 degrees is still within reach, but it will really take a shift in mindset. And frankly, I think we need to have a less extractive form of capitalism that we all imbibe by. The system needs to shift to reflect the reality that we've extracted what we can, and now we need to sort of shift to more regenerative approaches that are grounded in community, in proximity. And it's a choice that I think we can make. And we spoke about this um, during the context of the recent U.S. elections. It's a choice that I think each of us can make to live differently, to make different choices, to invest differently. And that's my ultimate hope and vision of what we're building at Heading for Change, is that we make the case that every investment can be climate smart and every climate smart investment can be gender smart. And this is something that Suzanne, our founder, and Rachel and our team thought through as a core goal. Like, this is what Heading for Change is really trying to do, is make that case and demonstrate how it's possible. But it requires a shift in behavior and mindset.
Indeed, indeed. And Suzanne, who you refer to, is of course Suzanne Beagle, who started Heading for Change before she died, and left a legacy with Heading for Change, and was very instrumental in bringing a lot of the climate and gender worlds together. I'm remembering, speaking of cognitive dissonance, being at COP, I think 22 in Marrakesh, Morocco, and just as that COP was getting started, there was a 2016 election. And as you mentioned, that changed the tone quite dramatically. It was just a year at that point after the Paris Accord, and there was a lot of excitement about putting that into effect. And of course, things have of course developed since then. But the change in course in the U.S. Before that COP is now mirrored again in the change in course as you go into this COP. But there is also, as you mentioned, new leadership, including women's leadership. So I be super eager to hear what you find there, and what the tone there is. You want to give us a final thought as we send you on your way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are so many incredible women leaders that I look up to and hope to connect with next week. And I'm thinking, for example, Catherine McKenna, who is the previous Environment Minister of Canada, has started this campaign, which has gone pretty viral this week, Women Leading on Climate, with the We Mean Business Coalition. And they're trying to galvanize women's voices across the climate space and really center why this type of leadership matters. Of course, you have Mary Robinson, Christiana Figueres, a lot of the indigenous voices, Himdu Ibrahim, etc. Even other foundations, philanthropic entities will be on site, and we're really seeing women's leadership show up here by just getting to the heart of what needs to be solved for coming up with more right size, fit for purpose, proximate solutions, thinking about, and ultimately, I think this is more of a sort of ecosystem, systems level based approach to leadership, but also to investing that we're seeing take shape with these types of initiatives, but also some of the, like I said, some of the funds that we're investing in, some of the projects that we're seeing. That gives me a lot of hope, and just seeing, these things take shape and come to life. So I'll be showering myself in some of that hope, but also being pragmatic. I think we must, it's ultimately the COP process, and even thinking about the NCQG, my hat's off to the co-chair Fiona and Zahir, who've been with the whole, all the countries basically been working tirelessly at this over the last years. The Standing Committee for Finance, like the COP is about countries. It's about parties. That's the thing I think for us to remember, this distinction between state actors and non-state actors. And each of us has influence. So I'm just hoping that as we walk into different rooms, we remember that power and influence that we have. Some might be in being a bit of a whisperer to negotiating teams. Some might be actually the ones who are having to change multiple notes in the draft documents. Then there's the leaders themselves who, there's a whole process. So just rest up before you get there. And also remember that this is part of, a bigger ecosystem of work that we're all working on. And I will report back on how I feel after.
Terrific. Well, showering us with hope. Thank you so much for that, Sana. And I agree, women's leadership is key. And I thank you and appreciate your leadership on this. And thank you for joining the podcast.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to do it for this Agents of Impact podcast. Thanks to Sana Kapadia and Heading for Change. And thanks to our producer, Isaac Silk, and to the whole team at Impact Alpha, Investment News for a Sustainable Edge. And to all of you, Agents of Impact as well. Thanks again for all that you do.